All right, let's jump right into this. Welcome to today's Explainer, where we're unpacking one of the darkest, most genuinely terrifying chapters in all of American true crime. We're stepping back in time to look at a mystery that absolutely paralyzed an entire city and actually challenged one of the most famous lawmen in history. Today we're diving into the horrifying saga of the Mad Butcher and the long dark shadow of a man you probably already know, Eliot Ness. It's a story of a brilliant detective, a phantom killer, and a completely desperate city. So get comfortable because this one is truly gripping.
Section 1. A different era of terror.
Okay, so first up, we've got to clear up a pretty massive historical misconception right off the bat. You know how when we think of famous, clinically precise serial killers from the past, our minds kind of just lump them all together into one blurry timeline? Well, the environment completely shapes the crime. When we picture someone like H.H. Holmes, we're thinking of the 1890s Gilded Age, right? Victorian gaslight, cobblestone streets. But the Cleveland torso murders, they didn't happen in the romanticized 1890s. They unfolded in the 1930s. We are trading Victorian romance for the Great Depression. Think bleak industrial grit, desperate soup lines, sprawling shantytowns. It is a much, much harsher reality, and keeping that gritty timeline in mind is absolutely crucial to understanding the sheer terror of this specific case.
And stepping into that incredibly bleak landscape wasn't some old-school pipe-smoking Victorian detective. No way. The man hunting this 1930s killer was none other than Eliot Ness. Yeah, that Eliot Ness. The legendary lawman was fresh off his massive, high-profile victory against Al Capone over in Chicago. He's the ultimate 20th century hunter, and he's bringing his modern reputation and just this unyielding drive into a desperate city that was about to face a monster.
Section 2. The horror of Kingsbury Run. The reality of what Ness was up against between 1935 and 1938 is, well, it's incredibly grim. For 3 long years, a completely nameless serial killer, who the press eventually dubbed the Mad Butcher of Kingsbury Run, absolutely terrorized Cleveland, Ohio. And we need to look closely at who this killer was actually hunting. The victims were transients, drifting laborers, folks living in those sprawling makeshift shantytowns known as Hoovervilles, right along the Cuyahoga River. And I want to emphasize why this matters so deeply on a human level. These were vulnerable, forgotten people. They were populations hit devastatingly hard by the Great Depression. Because of their transient nature, they often didn't even have families nearby who could report them missing. They were basically invisible to society, which tragically made them the perfect targets for a predator.
12. That is the official toll of the Mad Butcher. 12 victims officially attributed to this nameless terror. But here's the thing. The true scale of the tragedy is likely much, much larger. Historians who have pored over these records, they suspect the actual toll could be upwards of 20 victims. Just think about that for a second. Up to 20 people just vanishing from the margins of society, brutalized by a single killer.
If we break down that official number of 12, we see the killer targeted both men and women, officially 7 men and 5 women. But honestly, here is the absolute most heartbreaking fact about this entire investigation. Out of all these recoveries, after all the police work, all the autopsies, only 2 victims were ever definitively identified. Just 2. The rest remain totally nameless, their identities stolen by the killer and essentially erased by the harshness of the Depression era.
The physical evidence left behind built a frankly terrifying psychological profile. The killer's signature was horrific. It included decapitation, and autopsies actually revealed this frequently happened while the victims were still alive, which is just chilling to even think about. They were then cleanly dismembered. But it was the surgical skill involved that really stopped investigators in their tracks. The cuts weren't messy, they were remarkably precise. This clinical precision led the police to a very disturbing conclusion. The Mad Butcher wasn't just some random frenzied attacker. He had extensive anatomical knowledge. They were likely looking for a doctor, a surgeon, or at the very least, a highly skilled butcher.
Section 3. Eliot Ness meets his match.
So these murders are paralyzing Cleveland. The city is in a total, all-out panic. And Eliot Ness, who is now acting as Cleveland's newly appointed safety director, he isn't just going to sit behind a desk. He takes personal charge of this case. He modernizes the local police force, brings in fresh forensic techniques, and has his team comb through literally thousands of tips. But despite his brilliance, despite all these modern methods, the Mad Butcher completely evades him. And the killer didn't just hide, he actively mocked him. In this audacious, terrifying cat-and-mouse game, the killer actually dumped the remains of 2 victims directly within sight of Eliot Ness's office window at City Hall. It was the ultimate taunt. It was basically the killer saying to the guy who took down Al Capone, "I'm right under your nose, and you literally cannot stop me." From 1935 to 1938, the terror went completely unchecked. By 38, an exhausted Ness is still combing through those thousands of tips, but he's just hitting constant dead ends. Frustrated and desperate to strip the killer of his hunting ground, Ness makes a drastic, highly controversial move. In August 1938, he ordered the police to round up hundreds of the homeless residents living in Kingsbury Run. And then, he ordered the entire shantytown burned to the ground. It was an extreme scorched earth measure to literally destroy the very place where the killer hunted.
Section 4. An unsolved mystery remains.
Now, while those tragic fires in August 1938 actually did mark the end of the official murder sequence, like the bodies did stop appearing, stopping the murders isn't the exact same thing as solving them, right? The case was never formally closed, leaving this permanent stain on Ness's otherwise legendary record. But Ness didn't walk away totally empty-handed. He had a prime target, Dr. Francis Sweeney. This is the tantalizing final piece of our puzzle. Ness had this prime suspect squarely in his crosshairs. Sweeney was a doctor, which perfectly matches that profile of a killer with extensive surgical and anatomical knowledge. But he was also exceptionally well connected politically, making him incredibly difficult to pin down. Ultimately, a formal conviction just slipped right through Ness's fingers.
Which brings us to a final haunting question. During the absolute climax of this investigation, Ness actually brought Dr. Sweeney into a hotel room for secret interrogations. Just picture that scene for a second. The legendary Eliot Ness, face-to-face with the man he is completely convinced is the Mad Butcher, locked in a room far away from the public eye. What on earth was said in that room? What kind of psychological warfare took place between this famous detective and this elusive surgeon? The fact that Sweeney walked free and the murders abruptly stopped leaves the mystery wide open forever. It's a question history still can't fully answer, but it's one that should absolutely leave you wanting to dig deeper into the shadows of Kingsbury Run.